Now there's another one I want to talk about real quick, and again we're getting quite a bit ahead of ourselves, but again these are good to know because we're going to be practicing these in the future, and they're going to make more sense once you actually start writing some code. So we have objects, we have arrays, we have undefined, we have null, int, float, and strings. So the next one I want to talk about, objects. Say obj is equal to, and it starts with a curly brace, ends with a curly brace, or bracket if you want to call it that. You have some sort of key, you have some sort of value. You have key2, whoops, another value. Notice how these all look like strings. I hit enter and it gives me an object, and that's something that we can actually use here. So the proto, don't worry about this. That's a lot of JavaScript functionality that comes with the object data type. We're not going to modify these or add any of these. But what's cool about obj, and this is where the power of object-oriented programming comes in, is we can type obj dot, and automatically we have key and key2 in here. So if we type obj dot key, that's the value, right? We said key is equal to, with a colon, value. But we also said obj.key2 is another value. Let's just capitalize that. And I'm going to show you that you don't necessarily need to have your key in a string. I say 27.8 or whatever that would roughly round to. I hit enter, and again I've got name and age. Even if you noticed up here when I had the key as a string, it automatically turned it into a key. So that's basically a string, or like a variable name without the quotations around it. It's unnecessary in an object. And so an object is a way of storing variables inside of other variables, but then you can name them as well. So you have all of these different data points inside of one variable. Now this is really, really powerful when it comes to storing information about one particular data object. I'm just going to clear this, and let's create a person object, right? We have person is equal to object. Let's say the name, okay, I'm just going to create a person object for myself. Age, we did this already, but this is a different object because we're calling it person. And I don't know, what is my favorite color maybe, right? We're going to say red. So I type that in, I hit enter. The console in our browser has now stated that, oh yeah, this exists. So now I can type person dot name. Oh, look at that. That's my name. Person dot age. If I type that right, that probably would have worked. Person dot age. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit embarrassing. I typed the word page so many times, I guess that's just habit. Person dot age. There we go. Third time's the charm. And let's try person dot color. We have red. Beautiful. But what happens if we just type person? We get the whole object. But we can't use that in a page. And again, we're going to get some hands-on experience with that in the future. But right now, it's just good to know that, hey, we can store multiple data points inside of one object. So you could have your friend, Kyle, for example, is equal to an object full of data points. And now you don't have to remember, 200 different variables. You can just remember that every object named Kyle or person or whatever you want to name it has these different sub-variables. That's a good way of putting it. Sub-variables inside of a variable. Now when we talk about arrays, right, remember we had objects and we had arrays. That last one was an object. An array is a list of variables. Now it's different from an object because an object very specifically has person.name or person.whatever variable you give it. Whereas an array is simply a list. So we could say friends is equal to, and we're just going to create an array this way, we use 2 hard brackets, and inside of it, we have a bunch of strings or ints or floats. Basically, you just declare a bunch of variables in a list that's all separated by commas. Very simple. So let's go ahead and delete that. And my friends are going to be Nathan, Prairie, and Zephyr. I hit enter, and this gives us something a little bit different. We haven't seen this one yet. We have 0, 1, 2. These are the keys, and it's sort of like an object, but we can't really rename these keys. If we did rename them, essentially we'd be working with an object. Is simply a list. Now, we saw right here, 0 is Nathan. In computer programming, when we start counting, it always starts at 0. So 0 is actually 1, 1 is actually 2, 2 is actually 3. Only in human language do we start counting at 1, but computers, they start at 0. So if I type friends and curly brackets not curly brackets, sorry, like these hard brackets, that's telling JavaScript, okay, so I'm looking for a friends array, which is what we wrote up here, and I'm looking for the very first piece of information that's in there. So if I go ahead and hit enter, what should come back is the name Nathan, just as we expected. Now, if I type friends2, what do you think is going to be returned? If you think the name Zephyr is going to be returned, you're absolutely right. Now, here's a tricky one. What happens when you type friends3? We know that 3 doesn't exist in here. So what is going to be returned? Undefined. Now in JavaScript, if you were trying to access a variable or a data point that does not exist, it's going to be undefined every single time. And we can see this as being a true statement. Let's actually type that correctly. Friends3 is equal to undefined. If this turns out to be true, as in friends3, the third or the fourth item in this array, does not exist, this is going to pop the little word true underneath, just like that. So now you know about objects, you know about arrays, you know about strings, ints, int is short for integers, and floats. Oh, and I lied, and undefined. Now these are just variables. The way I declared them in here is the exact same way that you can declare them in your JavaScript, whether that's your internal JavaScript on your page, variable ABC is equal to 1, 2, 3. It's the exact same way. Or if you're in just a regular JS file, you could say age is equal to 27.8. We know that, this is a float because it has that decimal point. And we know that if we remove the decimal point, that there's going to be, that this is going to be an integer. Now, what I would like you to do for just a little bit of practice, there's no homework here, but I would like you to get a little bit of practice. So just open up a blank index HTML file. I just call it index. It could be any HTML file. It could actually be any page anywhere. You can open up Facebook if you wanted to. Right click, go to inspect or inspect elements, depending on the browser that you're using. Go over to console and just start typing some JavaScript. Declare some variables. So declare the variable my age is equal to whatever your age is. If you're 15 or if you're 45, and hit enter. Just see what happens. And then type. And you can type your integers, your floats, your strings. You can see if there are any errors. You can sort of learn what works, what doesn't work. And while you're doing that, type your variables in and see if it turns out, if it spits out exactly what you are expecting. And if it's not what you're expecting, well, then you can figure out why. You can ask why. And remember, if you have questions, ask in our Facebook group. What I would like you to do is create an object, create an array. Remember, an array is just a list. Create one string, one integer, and create one float. Do that in your console, and you will be very familiar with variables. We're going to get into comparisons a little bit down the road, and that's when these variables are going to really come to life, and you're going to be able to see things. I know that this lesson right now is a little bit dry. It's not super exciting or anything. This is a fundamental concept, pretty much every programming language, and it's really, really important to know how these work, because this is transferable. What you're learning in this lesson is not just JavaScript. It works in PHP, in Python, in Node, in every other language. They're basically objects, arrays, strings, integers, and floats. There are actually a bunch of other ones depending on the language that you're writing, but these are the most common ones that are completely transferable. So it's really, really good to know how these work. So go ahead, give that a shot. If you get stuck, ask questions. We're here to help. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.